I've spent enough years around people to notice one thing. The ones who carry the heaviest weight are often the ones who never did anything wrong. They just survived when someone else didn't. And that kind of guilt, the quiet kind, can wear a soul down to nothing. I saw it once, up in the mountains, in a place where nobody expected to find anything worth saving. The wolf was hanging from a twisted root over a 200-foot drop. Caleb Mercer saw it happen through the blowing snow, a gray shape dangling at the edge of the world, but she wasn't struggling to climb up. She was holding something in her jaws, a torn burlap bag, filthy and half-rotted, clenched like it mattered more than breathing. He extended the catch pole. Their eyes met. She looked at the pole, looked at him. Then she opened her paw, not her mouth, her paw, and let go of the root. She fell into the white void below, still gripping that bag. Caleb stood frozen on the cliff edge, wind tearing at his coat, staring at the place where she'd vanished. His hand wouldn't stop shaking. If this story found you tonight, we'd love to know where you're listening from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, that little button helps us keep bringing you moments like these. Thank you for being here. 6 hours earlier, the coffee in Caleb Mercer's thermos was already cold. He didn't notice. Hadn't noticed yesterday either, when he'd brewed it and forgot to drink it. The mug sat on the counter where it always sat, same spot for 8 years. The glaze worn smooth where his thumb rested. The cabin was one room, wood stove, a cot with blankets he hadn't straightened in weeks. No photographs on the walls. There used to be two boys by a river, holding up a trout, grinning like the world would never touch them. He'd put it in the bottom drawer after the funeral. The drawer hadn't opened since. Outside, the sky pressed low and gray, snow coming, the kind of February cold that got into your joints and stayed there. The radio crackled at 10 a.m., Sheriff Frank Dawson's voice, flat and practical. Got a situation up on Bear Creek Ridge. Ranchers reporting a wolf acting strange, digging at some old burial site, hauling something off, not eating anything, just digging. Could be rabies. Check it out. Put it down if you have to. Caleb didn't answer, just grunted. Frank was used to that. He geared up the way he'd done 100 times, rifle, catch pole, rope with a carabiner clip, first aid kit, emergency bivouac, the rescue sled, lightweight plastic shell, standard issue strapped to his pack. The truck's radio had been broken for 3 months. He hadn't fixed it, hadn't seen the point. He drove until the road ended, then walked 4 hours through deepening snow, following tracks that told a strange story. Paw prints circling the same patch of ground over and over, blood spots frozen into the white. The wolf was hurting herself, clawing at earth too hard to dig. Torn fabric snagged on a low branch, gray and rotting. Then the storm hit. Wind came first, sharp and sudden, cutting visibility to nothing. Snow followed, not falling, but driving sideways, filling his tracks behind him as fast as he made them. He almost turned back, but the blood trail kept going, and something about those circling tracks wouldn't let him quit. He followed the ridge for another mile, head down against the wind, until the ground dropped away and he found himself at the cliff's edge. That's when he saw her, hanging from a twisted root, holding something in her jaws, and refusing to let go. She was gone. Caleb stood at the edge, wind screaming past his ears, staring at the white void below. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the storm. Gone. Just like that. But the bag, that filthy burlap bag she died for, had snagged on a rock ledge 40 feet down. He could see it through gaps in the blowing snow, caught on a jagged outcrop, flapping in the wind. He should leave it. Should turn around, hike back to the truck, file a report. Wolf down, probable rabies, case closed. His hands were already uncoiling the rope. He knew it was stupid, rappelling alone in a blizzard, no backup, radio dead. Every protocol he'd learned in 15 years said, walk away. But something in the way she'd looked at him right before she let go wouldn't leave his mind, like she was asking permission, like she wanted him to understand. He anchored the rope to the juniper root, the same one she'd clung to, and clipped his carabiner to the line, tested the hold twice. Then he went over the edge. The descent was brutal. Ice formed on his beard. Wind slammed him against the rock face, scraping his knuckles raw through his gloves. Visibility dropped to nothing. Came back, dropped again. He counted the rope marks as he lowered himself. 10 feet, 20, 30. At 40 feet, his boots hit something solid. A shelf, narrow, maybe 6 feet wide, covered in a drift of snow that had piled against the cliff face. And there, crumpled in the drift, was the wolf, alive. Her sides heaved with shallow breaths. One hind leg bent at a wrong angle, the bone not breaking skin, but clearly shattered beneath the fur. Blood streaked the snow around her, not pooling, just smeared, tracking her movement, because she was moving, dragging herself forward, inch by inch, broken leg trailing behind her like dead weight, her eyes fixed on something 3 feet away. The bag. It had fallen with her, landed just out of reach. She was crawling toward it through her own blood, claws scraping against frozen rock, breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Caleb got there first. He didn't mean to. He was moving toward her, thinking about the splint in his pack, calculating how to stabilize her leg for transport. The bag was just in the way. He reached down to move it aside. The wolf changed. 1 second, she was broken, dying, barely conscious. The next, she was on her feet, 3 feet. The shattered leg dragging teeth bared, hackles raised, a sound coming from her throat that wasn't quite a growl. Deeper than that, older. She lunged, not at him, past him, at the bag. He stumbled backward, boots slipping on the icy ledge. She hit the bag with her full weight, collapsed on top of it, her body covering it completely. Her eyes never left his face, her lips pulled back, showing teeth stained with her own blood. Caleb raised his hands, palms out, slow, easy, easy now. She didn't relax, didn't blink. Just lay there on the bag, sides heaving, watching him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He'd handled injured wolves before. They panicked. They bit because they were scared. This was different. This wolf wasn't scared. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she would die was dying to keep it. He backed up against the cliff wall, gave her space for a long moment. Neither of them moved. The wind howled, snow swirled around the ledge. Caleb's fingers were going numb inside his gloves. Then the wolf made a sound. Not a growl, not a howl. Something between a whine and a keen, a thin, broken note that rose and fell, rose and fell. It didn't sound like any vocalization he'd heard from a wolf in 15 years of rangering. It sounded like grief. He reached for his radio. Static. Dead. The storm had killed the signal. No backup. No help. Just him. A dying wolf. And a bag she'd rather fall off a cliff than lose. He made a decision. I'm taking you out of here. Both of you! She snarled when he moved toward her. He kept coming, Kiko, pulled the emergency blanket from his pack, unfolded it. When he reached for her, she bit. Her teeth sank through his glove, into the meat of his palm. He felt the pressure, the puncture, the warm spread of blood inside the leather. He wrapped her anyway. She thrashed, snapped at his face, caught his sleeve and tore it. He pinned her with his weight, got the blanket around her, lifted her onto the rescue sled before she could twist free. She fought until she couldn't fight anymore. Then she went limp. For one terrible second, he thought she was dead, but her eyes stayed open, tracking him, and her front paw, the one that still worked, reached out and pressed down on the bag. He strapped her to the sled, secured the bag beside her, started the long drag back to the cabin. 2 hours, maybe 3. He lost count. The wind fought him the whole way. His arms burned. His legs trembled. Twice he stumbled and nearly went down. The cold had seeped past his coat, past his skin, into the bone. But the whole way back, through the worst of the storm, he kept looking down at her paw on the bag. She never let go, not once, even unconscious. Her claws stayed hooked in the burlap. What was in there? What could possibly be worth dying for? The cabin was dark when he got the door open. Caleb dragged the sled inside, kicked the door shut against the wind, and stood there breathing hard. His lungs burned from the cold. His bitten hand had gone stiff. The blood dried tacky inside his glove. The wolf hadn't moved since she went limp on the ledge, but she was breathing, shallow, fast, her paw still pressed against the bag. He lit the lamp, got the wood stove going. The cabin warmed slowly, too slowly, but it was better than the storm screaming outside. First, the leg. He knelt beside her, pulling supplies from his kit. No proper splint. But he had made do with worse. He'd set deer legs before when he found them tangled in wire. This wasn't so different. 2 straight branches from the kindling pile, duct tape, an old bandana for padding. The break was bad. He could feel the bones shifting wrong under the fur when he touched it. She flinched but didn't wake. Shock, probably. Or exhaustion. Maybe both. He set the leg as best he could. Wrapped it tight. She whimpered once, a small, involuntary sound, but her eyes stayed closed. Then his hand. He peeled off the glove. The bite had gone deep. 2 punctures in the meat of his palm. Blood welling fresh when he flexed his fingers. He cleaned it with iodine from the kit. The sting sharp enough to make his eyes water. Wrapped it with gauze. His fingers were clumsy with cold and fatigue. He'd had worse. That was the truth of it. For a while, he just sat on the floor, back against the wall, watching her sleep. The firelight flickered across her fur gray and white, thick with winter coat, matted with blood and dirt. She was thin, too thin, ribs showing through like ridges under a worn blanket. She hadn't been eating, not for a while. His eyes kept going back to the bag. It sat beside her on the sled, burlap dark with moisture, edges frayed and torn. Whatever was inside had weight to it. He'd felt that when he strapped it down. Not heavy, but solid. Real. He shouldn't open it. Wasn't his business. Wasn't his right. Whatever she was guarding, she'd made clear she'd die before giving it up. But she almost had died, chose to fall rather than let go. What could be worth that Caleb reached for the bag? His fingers found the opening the burlap had torn along one seam, the fibers soft with age. He pulled it wider. The smell hit him first. Not rot, not death, just old. Earth and pine and fur, musk and dust and something else underneath it all. Something he couldn't name but recognized the way you recognize a song from when you were young. Familiar, distant, gone. He reached inside. His hand closed around leather, rope. He pulled it out. A collar, handmade. Braided rope and leather strips, woven together. The knots neat and deliberate. Small-sized for a pup, maybe 2 months old. The leather was worn soft, the edges smoothed by years of use. He reached in again. Another collar, larger this time. Different pattern, this one knotted instead of braided. The leather darker. Another, and another. He emptied the bag onto the floor. 23 collars, all different sizes, all handmade. The smallest could fit around his thumb and forefinger. The largest would circle a full-grown wolf's neck with room to spare. Each one unique, each one worn, each one carrying the smell of a specific animal, a specific life. And each one had a tag, carved wood, attached with thin leather cord. He picked one up, turned it toward the firelight. A shape had been cut into the surface, crude but deliberate. A star. 5 points. He checked another. A crescent moon. Another. A leaf. He went through them all, laying them out on the cabin floor. Stars and moons and leaves and circles and squares. Each tag different. Each one marking something. Someone. These weren't trophies. These weren't prey. These were names. One collar was smaller than the rest. Newer. The leather still stiff. The rope not yet worn smooth. Its tag showed a flower. 5 petals. Carved with care. Caleb sat back on his heels. His bandaged hand throbbed with his heartbeat. 23 wolves. 23 lives. All of them gone. All of them here. In this bag. Held tight by the only one left. A sound made him turn. The wolf was awake. She lay on the sled, eyes open, watching him. Not snarling, not lunging. She didn't have the strength for that anymore. But her gaze tracked from his face to the collars spread across the floor. And something in her body shifted. A tremor ran through her, ear to tail. She started to move, dragging herself off the sled, broken leg trailing. She pulled herself toward the collars. Each movement cost her. He could see it in the way her muscles shook, the hitch in her breathing. But she kept coming. She reached the nearest collar and pressed her nose against it, held there for a moment, breathing deep, then moved to the next. One by one, she touched them all. Then she began to push them together. Her muzzle nudged the largest collar toward the center, then the next largest beside it. She worked slowly, clumsily, shoving and adjusting until they formed a loose pile on the cabin floor. Not a perfect pattern, just a gathering, a bringing together of things that belonged near each other. The smallest collar, the one with the flower tag, she nosed into the center of the pile. Then she crawled into the middle, lay down among them, and closed her eyes. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just sat against the wall and watched the fire burn low. The wind howled outside. The cabin creaked and settled. The wolf's breathing slowed, deepened, around 2 a.m. She started making that sound again, basantiao, that keening, that thin, broken note that rose and fell like something being torn apart from the inside. She wasn't sleeping. Her eyes stayed closed, but her body trembled. And the sound kept coming, not loud, not sharp, just endless. A loss too big to hold, leaking out the only way she could. Caleb listened until his chest hurt. He didn't sleep. Neither did she. And somewhere around dawn, when the fire had burned to embers and the storm had finally gone quiet, he looked at the pile of collars on his floor. 23 names. 23 wolves. Someone had made these. Someone had known each animal well enough to give them a mark, a sign, a way to be remembered. Someone human. And that meant someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to this wolf's family. Morning came gray and cold. Caleb stood at the counter, pouring yesterday's coffee into his mug without bothering to heat it. His eyes burned from not sleeping. His bandaged hand throbbed when he gripped the mug, a dull pulse that matched his heartbeat. The wolf lay where she'd been all night, curled in her pile of collars, eyes half closed, breathing shallow and slow. He'd left water beside her, a plate of dried venison from his emergency supplies. She hadn't touched either. The water sat untouched. The venison hadn't even been sniffed. She was starving herself. Had been for a while. By the look of her, this wasn't injury. This wasn't shock. This was choice. Caleb drank his cold coffee and watched her through the steam of his breath. The cabin was warmer now. The stove had been going all night, but she lay pressed against the floor like she was trying to disappear into it. He checked her leg before he left. The splint was holding. The swelling had gone down some. She'd live. If she decided to, that was the question, wasn't it? He pulled on his coat, grabbed his keys. His legs felt heavy, the exhaustion settling into his bones like lead. I'll be back. She didn't open her eyes. The roads were bad but passable. The storm had blown through overnight, leaving 2 feet of fresh powder and drifts that reached the truck's door handles in places. Caleb drove slow, four-wheel grinding through the white, wipers scraping at the ice that kept forming on the windshield. Town was 40 minutes on a good day. Today, it took an hour and a half. He found Sheriff Frank Dawson at the diner on Main Street, working through a plate of eggs and toast. The place was half empty, just a few old-timers at the counter nursing their coffee, a young couple in the corner booth. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee thick in the air. Frank looked up when Caleb slid into the seat across from him. Thought you'd still be up on the ridge. Came down early. Just though. Caleb signaled the waitress for coffee. Found your wolf. Dead but alive, barely broke her leg going off a cliff. Frank's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Going off a cliff. Fell or jumped. Hard to say. The waitress brought his coffee. Caleb wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into his stiff fingers. She was carrying something. A bag. Wouldn't let go of it even when she was hanging over a 200-foot drop. What kind of bag? Burlap, old, full of collars. Frank set his fork down. Wolf collars. Caleb continued. Handmade, rope and leather, each one different. 23 of them, each one with a little carved tag, stars, moons, leaves, like someone was marking them, naming them. Frank's face had gone still, not surprised, something else. Something that looked like recognition settling into the lines around his eyes. You know what I'm talking about. Frank picked up his coffee, took a long sip, set it down. Walter Greenwood, Sudsate, who, old rancher, had a place up past Miller's Creek, backed up against the National Forest, died last October. Frank pushed his eggs around with his fork, not eating. He made those collars. Been doing it for 20 years, maybe longer. Fed the wolves on his property, gave each one a name, kept track of them like they were his own stock. Fed wild wolves. I know how it sounds, but Walter was... Frank shrugged. Walter was Walter. Kept to himself mostly. Didn't bother anyone. The ranchers complained some, said he was encouraging predators, but his land, his business, nobody pushed it. Caleb thought about the collars spread across his cabin floor, the worn leather, the careful knots. 20 years of work. What happened to him? Heart gave out. His wife found him in the barn one morning. He was 78. It happens. And the wolves. Frank's jaw tightened. He looked down at his plate. About a week after Walter died, someone hit the pack, spotlight hunting. Drove up in trucks, caught them in the open, shot them all. His voice flattened. Illegal as hell. We never caught who did it. Caleb's coffee had gone cold in his hands. He didn't drink it. How many? All of them, far as we could tell. Walter had been tracking that pack for years. Said there were about 24 at the peak. After the shooting, we found, 15, 16 bodies. The rest either died somewhere we didn't find them or scattered. 15 bodies, 23 collars. What happened to the collars? Walter's wife said he collected them. After the shooting, he went up there and gathered every collar he could find, put them in a bag, and buried them with the wolves. Made a little grave up on the ridge, marked it with stones. Caleb set his mug down. If he buried them, he said slowly, how does the wolf have them? Frank didn't have an answer. The Greenwood place sat at the end of a dirt road that hadn't been plowed since the storm. Caleb left his truck at the mailbox and walked the last quarter mile. Boots crunching through the crust of frozen snow. The house was old, but solid, 2 stories. White clapboard, a porch that sagged at one corner. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. He knocked. The woman who answered was small and sharp-eyed, 70 or thereabouts, her white hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a man's flannel shirt over her sweater too big for her. The sleeves rolled up past her wrists. Mrs. Hollister, Maggie. She looked him over. You're the ranger. Frank called ahead. Yes, ma'am. She held the door open. Come in, then. No sense standing in the cold. The house smelled like wood smoke and coffee and something else underneath lavender. Maybe. Or dried flowers. The furniture was old but clean. Photographs covered every surface of the walls, the mantel, the side tables. Caleb's eyes moved across them as Maggie led him to the kitchen. Wolves. Dozens of photographs of wolves, and in almost every one, a tall man with white hair and weathered hands, Walter Greenwood, standing at the edge of his property at dusk. Wolves gathered at the tree line behind him, kneeling in the snow, fitting a collar around a young wolf's neck, sitting on his porch with a gray female lying at his feet like a dog. 20 years of photographs, 20 years of a man and his wolves. Coffee. Caleb turned. Maggie stood at the stove, kettle in hand. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. She poured 2 cups, brought them to the table, sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her mug, the same way his did, seeking warmth. Holding on. Frank said you found Ghost. The wolf. That's what Walter called her. The big female gray and white, bigger than the others. She was the oldest of the last litter. Her mother was the pack alpha. Maggie's eyes went distant. Gracie. Walter loved that wolf. Said she was the smartest animal he'd ever known. So, what happened to Gracie? Same as the rest. The night of the shooting. Maggie's voice didn't waver, but her hands tightened on the mug. I heard the trucks around 9, spotlights, then the shots. Walter was out the door before I could stop him. Took his shotgun. He was 77 years old with a bad hip. What was he going to do? She paused, looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. By the time I got up there, it was done. I found him sitting by the bodies. He didn't say a word, just sat there in the snow, holding Gracie's collar. Caleb didn't speak, waited. He collected all the collars he could find, put them in one of the old feed bags, buried it with the wolves dug the grave himself, even with that hip, marked it with a stack of stones. She shook her head. He visited every day after that, rain or shine, right up until he couldn't walk anymore. Did he ever see Ghost after the shooting? Maggie nodded slowly. Once. He told me she was at the tree line, watching him visit the grave. He left food for her. She didn't take it. Her voice caught, just slightly. I think she was waiting for him to fix it, and he couldn't. Caleb thought about the wolf in his cabin, the way she'd gathered the collars together, the way she'd curled up in the middle of them, like she was trying to be with them one last time. Mrs. Hollister, Maggie, if Walter buried those collars, how does the wolf have them now? Maggie looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, she said finally. I truly don't. After Walter died, I haven't been back up there. It's too far to walk now, and the road's been washed out since the fall rains. She reached across the table, touched his wrist. But I can tell you this, that wolf didn't just find that grave by accident. She knew where it was. She knew what was buried there. How? Because she watched Walter visit it. Every day for 5 months from the shooting in October until he died in March. She followed him, kept her distance, but she watched. Walter told me once that he thought she was grieving too, that she came to the grave for the same reason he did. Caleb sat back in his chair. The wolf had watched, had learned the location, and then, after Walter died, after the one person who understood her loss was gone, she'd gone back, dug up the collars, taken back her family. There's one more thing. Maggie stood, moved to a cabinet by the door. She pulled out a cardboard box, set it on the table between them. Walter's things. I've been meaning to go through them, but... She opened the box. Inside a leather journal, worn soft with use, a pocket knife with a bone handle, reading glasses, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, something else. Maggie lifted it out. A collar, handmade, rope and leather, the same pattern as the others. But this one was new, the leather still stiff, the rope not yet worn smooth, and the tag a flower, 5 petals, the same as the smallest collar in the bag. He made it after the shooting, Maggie said quietly. For Ghost. She was the only one who survived. He wanted her to have one too, to know she was still part of the family. Her voice broke. He never got to give it to her. Caleb stared at the collar in Maggie's hands, the same flower as Gracie's tag. The alpha. The mother. Walter had made Ghost a collar that matched her mother's, so she would know, so she would remember where she came from, but Ghost didn't know that. She didn't know the collar existed. She only knew that her family was dead, that she had survived, and that she carried their memory in a rotting burlap bag she refused to release. She was starving herself in his cabin right now, lying in a pile of collars, waiting to die. And somewhere in Walter's journal, Caleb could see it there, leather-bound. Full of handwritten pages was the answer to the question that had been forming in his mind since he first saw her on that cliff. Why had she survived? What happened the night her family died? The cabin was too quiet when he got back. Caleb pushed through the door, snow falling from his shoulders, and stopped. The wolf lay where he'd left her, curled in the center of her collar pile, but something had changed. Her breathing had gone shallow, barely visible. The water dish sat untouched. The venison had dried at the edges, a skin forming on the meat. She wasn't sleeping. Her eyes were open, half-lidded, staring at nothing. He knelt beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was there, weak, thready, too fast. Her gums had gone pale when he lifted her lip. Dehydration, starvation, a body shutting down because the thing inside it had already quit. The broken leg wasn't killing her. She was. Caleb sat back on his heels. His bandaged hand throbbed. The exhaustion pressed down on him like a physical weight. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. The journal from Maggie's box was in his coat pocket. He could feel its weight against his chest. He pulled it out, moved to the chair by the stove, and opened it to the first page. Walter's handwriting was cramped and careful, the letters of an old man who'd learned to write in a one-room schoolhouse. The early entries were simple: weather reports, wolf sightings, notes about which animals had pups, which ones were sick, which ones had moved on, 20 years of observations, 20 years of watching and recording and caring. Caleb turned the pages faster, looking for October, looking for the night everything ended. He found it near the back. October 17th. The handwriting here was different, shaky, uneven. The pen had pressed hard enough to tear the paper in places. I heard the trucks around 9 p.m. By the time I got my boots on, the shooting had started. Maggie tried to stop me. I went anyway. What else could I do? They were my family too. Caleb turned the page. I got there too late. They were already gone. Gracie, the pups, all of them. The men had driven off. I could hear their trucks on the fire road heading south. Didn't see their faces, didn't see the plates, just taillights disappearing into the dark. I found Gracie last. She was lying at the edge of the ravine, facing west, facing the direction they came from. She didn't run. She never ran. The next entry was dated the following morning. The handwriting had steadied, but there was something different in it now, something heavy. I went back at first light, needed to understand what happened. The snow had held the tracks clear as a photograph. I spent 3 hours reading them. Most of the pack ran east when the lights hit. Natural instinct, away from the threat. But the tracks got tangled near the ravine. Confusion, panic. Some of them turned back. Some of them fell. And then I found Ghost's trail. Caleb's hands tightened on the journal. Her prints ran west at first, toward the trucks, toward the lights. Wrong direction. I don't know why. Maybe she got turned around in the chaos. Maybe she was trying to reach Gracie. But then something hit her, hard. The prints skid sideways, tumble, slide toward the ravine edge, like she was shoved, knocked off her feet. Gracie's prints were right behind her. I found the place where Ghost went over the edge. 40-foot drop to a ledge below. Survivable, barely. The snow would have cushioned some of it. And I found where Gracie turned back, after she pushed her daughter into the ravine, after she made sure Ghost couldn't follow her back into the guns. She saved her. The only way she could. Caleb stopped reading. His chest felt tight. He looked at the wolf lying on his floor, surrounded by the collars of her dead family, starving herself to death. She didn't know. He turned back to the journal. Ghost doesn't know what Gracie did. She can't know. I've seen her watching from the tree line when I visit the grave. The way she holds herself low, tail tucked, ears flat. That's not grief. That's shame. She thinks she ran away. She thinks she's the reason they're dead. But she's wrong. She survived because her mother loved her enough to push her off a cliff. And now she's out there alone, carrying that weight. And I don't know how to tell her the truth. The entry ended there. Caleb closed the journal. His hands were shaking. He looked at the wolf, at her closed eyes, at her paw still resting on the pile of collars. She'd spent 5 months believing she was a coward, believing she'd abandoned her family when they needed her most, and she'd punished herself for it every single day, refusing to eat, refusing to live, digging up the grave so she could carry the evidence of her failure, but she hadn't failed. She'd been saved, and she had no way of knowing it. Caleb stood, grabbed his flashlight, headed for the door. He needed to see it for himself. The burial site was 2 miles northwest, past the old fire road, up a ridge that overlooked the valley. The light was fading fast by the time he reached the clearing. Long shadows stretched across the snow. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness. The grave was there, exactly as Maggie had described. A stack of stones, knee-high, tilted by wind and weather but still standing. The ground around it told its own story, torn up, gouged, claw marks frozen into ruts and ridges. The wolf had been here dozens of times, digging, retrieving, carrying away. But there was something else. 10 feet from the main grave, half hidden by a drift. A second hole, smaller, fresher, the edges still sharp, not yet worn by weather. Caleb knelt beside it, brushed the snow away. Bones, wolf bones, small ones, vertebrae, ribs, the delicate curve of a skull. They'd been arranged at the bottom of the hole, not scattered like predation leaves them, not gnawed or cracked, placed, positioned, laid out with something like care, and beside them, resting on the frozen earth, one collar, the smallest one, the flower tag. This wasn't part of Walter's burial. These bones were old weathered, cleaned by time, pups that hadn't survived their first winter. Maybe. The natural losses every pack endured, Ghost had found them, gathered them, brought them here, and she'd dug herself a space beside them. The hole was wolf-sized. The bones were arranged at one end, leaving room, just enough room for a body to curl up next to them. She wasn't just mourning, she was preparing. Caleb stood. His legs felt unsteady beneath him. He walked to the edge of the ravine, the place where Walter's journal said Ghost had gone over. The drop was steep, 40 feet to a narrow ledge below. Snow had drifted against the cliff face, softening the landing. A young wolf, strong and lucky, could survive that fall. He looked at the terrain, the way the ground sloped, the way the clearing funneled toward this edge. If you were a wolf and the lights came from the west, and you panicked, and you ran the wrong direction, you'd end up right here. And if someone hit you from behind, someone bigger, someone faster, someone who knew exactly what she was doing, you'd go over the edge before you understood what was happening. Gracie had positioned herself between the trucks and her pups. When the shooting started, she'd seen her daughter running toward the danger instead of away from it, and she'd made a choice, the hardest choice a mother could make. She'd knocked Ghost into the ravine, made sure she fell, made sure she couldn't follow. Then she'd turned back and faced the guns alone. Caleb looked at the grave, at the second hole Ghost had dug for herself, at the bones she'd gathered, the collar she'd placed, the space she'd left for her own body. She'd been waiting to die since October, waiting to join a family she thought she'd abandoned, and all this time, she'd been carrying the weight of a crime she never committed. He turned and started running back toward the cabin. The cabin door hung open. Caleb saw it from 50 yards out, the dark rectangle against the snow, lamplight spilling into the dusk. His legs burned from running. His lungs felt scraped raw by the cold. But he didn't slow down. He hit the porch at full speed, slammed through the doorway, empty. The pile of collars lay undisturbed on the floor, the water dish, the untouched venison. But the wolf was gone. Blood on the floorboards, a smear of red leading from where she'd been lying to the door. Claw marks gouged into the wood near the latch, deep grooves where she'd scratched and scratched until the hook gave way. She'd torn herself out of here, broken leg and all. Caleb grabbed his flashlight and followed the trail. The blood was easy to track, dark spots against the white snow, spaced close together at first, then spreading further apart as her strength failed. She was slowing down, dragging, every movement leaving a price in red. He knew where she was going before he saw her. The cliff. She lay at the edge, muzzle hanging over the drop, her body stretched flat against the frozen ground. The same place he'd first found her, the same ledge she'd fallen from 2 days ago. She'd crawled a quarter mile through the snow to get here, in the dark, in the cold. with a shattered leg dragging behind her, leaving a trail that looked like something had been butchered to finish what she'd started. Caleb stopped 15 feet away. His breath came in ragged gasps, clouds of white vapor disappearing into the night. The flashlight beam caught her eyes. They reflected green, then gold, then nothing. As she turned her head away, she didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She was past that now. She just lay there, looking down at the darkness below. Caleb didn't move closer, didn't try to grab her. He knew how that would end. She'd go over the edge before he could reach her, and this time there wouldn't be a ledge to break her fall. He sat down in the snow. The cold soaked through his pants immediately. His hands were shaking not from the temperature, from something that had been building in his chest since he'd read Walter's journal. "I had a brother." The words came out rough, cracked. He hadn't said them out loud to anyone in years. The wolf's ears twitched. She didn't look at him, but she was listening. "Danny, he was 29. I was 34. Caleb's voice caught. He swallowed hard, kept going. "We did search and rescue together. Same team for 6 years. I was lead. He was better than me at most of it. Faster, braver, but I was older, so I got the badge." The wolf's breathing had changed. Slower now, still watching the drop, but waiting. Spring flood, 8 years ago. A kid got stuck on a rock in the middle of the river, maybe 10 years old, hanging onto a branch, water up to his chest. Current was running fast. Too fast. We couldn't get a line to him. Caleb picked up a handful of snow, squeezed it until water ran between his fingers. Danny wanted to go in. Free swim. No rope. I said no. Water was too fast. We'd lose him and the kid both. I gave the order to wait. Wait for the line. Wait for backup. Wait. The snow fell from his hand, scattered on the ground. He went anyway. The wolf turned her head, just slightly, enough to see him from the corner of her eye. Made it halfway. Got the kid. Threw him toward the bank. One of the other guys caught him. Caleb's throat tightened. Then the current took Danny under. I stood on the shore and watched. That's what I remember, standing there, watching the water go over him, like if I just kept looking, he'd come back up. His hands were trembling badly now. He pressed them flat against his thighs. I gave the right order. The water was too fast. The line wasn't set. Every manual, every protocol, every piece of training I ever had said wait, and I waited. He laughed a harsh, ugly sound that hurt coming out. I followed the rules. I was careful. I was smart. And my little brother drowned 20 feet away from me because he was brave enough to do what I wasn't. The wolf was watching him fully now. Her body still pointed toward the edge, but her eyes were on his face and... You want to know the worst part? Caleb's voice dropped. I told myself it was his fault. For years, he didn't follow orders. He took a stupid risk. He got himself killed. That's what I said. That's the story I told, so I could look at myself in the mirror. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. His cheeks were wet. The cold made them burn. But I know what I am. I'm the guy who stood on the bank. I'm the guy who watched his brother go under and didn't move. I'm the one who's still here because I was too careful to try. He looked at the wolf. Really looked. You think you're the only one who ran? She flinched. A full-body tremor ran through her, head to tail, like he'd hit her. I read the journal, Walter's journal. Your mother hit you from behind, knocked you off your feet, pushed you over the edge of that ravine so the guns couldn't reach you. The wolf's claws dug into the frozen ground. Her lips pulled back, not a snarl, not a warning. Pain. Pure pain. She saved you. The only way she could. And you've been killing yourself ever since for something you didn't do. The wolf inched forward, toward the drop. Her front paws scraped the edge, sending snow and pebbles into the void below. Caleb didn't move. Go ahead, fall. But that bag won't be there. Those collars, 23 names, 23 lives, they'll end up in a dumpster somewhere, burned, thrown out. And then nobody remembers them. Not Walter, not Maggie. Just you, and you'll be gone too. She stopped. Her body trembled. The broken leg dragged uselessly behind her. Your mother didn't push you off a cliff so you could jump off another one. She pushed you so someone would be left. Someone to carry them. Someone to remember. His voice cracked. He didn't try to fix it. I know it doesn't feel like enough. Surviving. I know it feels like the wrong one made it. He pressed his palms into the snow, feeling the cold burn into his skin. I've been dying for 8 years because I couldn't figure out how to live with what I am, with what I didn't do. The wolf's eyes glistened from the cold. Maybe, or something else. You die. They disappear. Every collar, every name, everything your mother gave her life for. He leaned forward. Is that what she wanted? Is that why she pushed you? The wolf went still. Her claws were still hooked over the edge. Her body still pointed toward the drop, but she wasn't moving forward anymore. And somewhere in those gold-green eyes, something shifted. Caleb didn't carry her back. He couldn't. His arms were shaking too badly, his legs threatening to buckle with every step. Instead, he walked beside her slow, patient, matching her broken pace as she dragged herself away from the cliff edge. It took an hour to cover a quarter mile. She stopped every few yards, sides heaving, the broken leg leaving a furrow in the snow behind her. He didn't rush her, didn't try to pick her up, just walked and waited and walked again. Twice she stopped and looked back at the cliff. Both times. He stopped too. Both times. She turned and kept going. The cabin was cold when they reached it. The fire had burned down to embers. The door still hanging open from when she'd escaped. Caleb got her inside, closed the door, rebuilt the fire. His hands were clumsy with exhaustion. His bandaged palm throbbed with every movement. The wolf crawled to her pile of collars, lay down among them. Didn't close her eyes, just watched him. He sat against the far wall. Neither of them slept. Morning came gray and slow. The sound of an engine woke him from a half-doze. Headlights swept across the window, then cut out. A door slammed. Footsteps on the porch. A knock. Caleb pushed himself up, joints cracking, and opened the door. Maggie Hollister stood on the porch, the cardboard box in her arms. She wore Walter's flannel again, snow dusting her white hair. Frank told me you went up to the burial site last night, said he saw your truck on the fire road. She looked past him, into the cabin, and saw the wolf lying among the collars. Her breath caught. Oh, there she is. She tried to go over the cliff again. Maggie's eyes went to the blood on the floor, the trail leading from the door, the wolf's shattered leg, the splint torn and hanging loose. But she came back. She came back. Maggie stepped inside slowly, her eyes never leaving the wolf. Ghost watched her approach, not with fear, not with aggression, just watching, taking her measure. Hello, girl. Maggie's voice was soft. Walter talked about you every day, right up until the end. He never stopped hoping you'd come back. The wolf's ears flattened. She pressed herself lower against the floor. Maggie set the box on the table. I brought his things. All of them this time. You should have what's in here. Caleb moved to the table. The box held the same items he had seen at Maggie's house, the reading glasses, the pocket knife, the journal. But there was more now. Photographs, a worn leather glove, a wooden spoon, carved with a wolf's head on the handle, and at the bottom, wrapped in the same cloth, the collar. He lifted it out. The leather was stiff, the rope still bright, unworn, waiting. The flower tag caught the lamplight. 5 petals, carved with care. He made it the week after the shooting, Maggie said. Worked on it every night. Said if Ghost ever came back, he wanted her to know she still had a family. Her voice wavered. He wanted her to see her mother's mark, to know she belonged. Caleb turned the collar in his hands. The craftsmanship was identical to the others, the same knots, the same braiding, the same patient care. Walter had made this for a wolf he might never see again. A wolf who didn't know she was loved. "There's an entry in the journal," Maggie said. "The last one he wrote before he died. I think she should hear it." Caleb set the collar down, picked up the journal, turned to the final pages. Walter's handwriting here was thin, unsteady. The letters of a man whose hands had stopped cooperating. March 3rd. Can't walk to the grave anymore. Legs won't take me. Maggie says I need to rest, but I can't stop thinking about her. About Ghost. She's still out there. I've seen her tracks at the tree line. She comes at dusk and watches the house. Won't come closer. Won't take the food I leave. I think I understand now. She's not watching for me. She's watching because she doesn't believe she deserves to come home. Caleb glanced at the wolf. She lay still among her collars, but her eyes were open, fixed on him, listening to the sound of his voice even if she couldn't understand the words. He kept reading. I made her a collar. Same flower as Gracie's. Same knots. Same leathers. If she ever finds her way back, I want her to know the truth. She didn't run away. Her mother pushed her. Gracie saved her the only way she could by making sure Ghost couldn't follow her into the guns. That's not cowardice. That's not abandonment. That's what it looks like when someone loves you more than their own life. I hope she understands someday. I hope she stops punishing herself for surviving. The collar is in my box. Maggie knows where to find it. If Ghost ever comes home, I want her to wear it. I want her to know she was always part of us. Cherish. I want her to know her mother would be proud. Caleb closed the journal. The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the wind against the windows. The wolf hadn't moved, but something had changed in the way she held herself, a tension he hadn't noticed until it started to release. Her body, pressed so flat against the floor, had lifted slightly. Her ears, pinned back for days, had come forward. She was listening. Caleb picked up the collar, crossed the room slowly, knelt 3 feet from her, close enough to reach, far enough to give her space. This is yours. She didn't growl, didn't flinch, just watched him with those gold-green eyes. Walter made it for you. The same flower your mother wore. The same mark. He held it out, letting her see. She wanted you to survive. He wanted you to know you still belonged. He reached forward, slowly, carefully. She could have bitten him, could have lunged, snapped, driven him back. But she stayed still, trembling, every muscle tight as he looped the leather around her throat and fastened the buckle. The collar settled against her fur. The flower tag hung just below her jaw, catching the firelight. Ghost looked down, pressed her nose against the wooden tag, held there, breathing deep, taking in the smell of leather and rope and Walter's hands. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she stood, 3 legs, shaking badly. She limped to the pile of collars on the floor, bent her head, picked up the smallest one, the one with the flower tag, Gracie's collar in her teeth. She carried it back to where Caleb knelt and dropped it at his feet. The collar lay on the floorboards between them. Worn leather, faded rope, the flower tag that had marked an alpha, a mother, a wolf who'd died facing the guns. Caleb stared at it, looked at Ghost. She pressed her nose against his knee, brief, deliberate, then pulled back and lay down beside Gracie's collar, her head resting near his leg, her eyes closing for the first time since he'd found her on that cliff. She's giving it to you, Maggie said from across the room. Her voice was thick. Walter always said Gracie was the heart of the pack. I think Ghost wants you to understand what that meant, what her mother did. Caleb picked up the collar. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years against fur. He could smell it, pine and earth and something else, something warm. He held it for a long time. The wolf's breathing had slowed, deepened. The trembling had stopped. She lay beside him, the new collar around her neck, her mother's collar in his hands, and for the first time since he'd found her hanging over that cliff, she looked peaceful, not dead, not dying, not waiting for the end, just resting. Caleb looked at the collar in his hands, at the flower tag that matched the one around Ghost's neck. 2 flowers. Mother and daughter. Walter had known the truth all along, had tried to tell her in the only way he could, and now, finally, the message had been delivered. The afternoon light came through the window in long, yellow bars. Caleb sat at the table with a needle, waxed thread, and the burlap bag spread flat before him. The fabric was old thin in places, torn along the seams, stained with dirt and blood and 5 months of desperate carrying. But the weave was still sound. It could be fixed. He worked slowly, carefully, each stitch small and tight, the way his father had taught him 40 years ago, mending horse tack on the family ranch. The needle punched through burlap with a soft pop. The thread pulled taut with a whisper. Pop, whisper, pop, whisper. His bandaged hand ached with every movement. He didn't stop. The wolf watched from across the room. She lay on her side near the stove, the collar still around her neck, the flower tag resting against her fur. Her eyes tracked his movements not with suspicion anymore, something quieter, patience, maybe, or just exhaustion too deep for fear. Maggie had left an hour ago, promising to return with food and supplies. The cabin felt different without her emptier, but not lonely, just quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Caleb finished the last seam, held the bag up to the window, checking for gaps. The light didn't come through. The stitches held. He gathered the collars from the floor. One by one, he placed them back inside the largest first, then working down, each one different, each one a name he would never know. Stars and moons and leaves and circles, carved by a man who'd loved these animals enough to mark them. 23 collars, 23 lives, the smallest one Gracie's. With the flower tag he held for a moment longer. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years against fur. He could almost feel the warmth of the wolf who'd worn it, the weight of what she'd done. He placed it on top of the others and folded the bag closed. In the corner of the cabin, he spread a wool blanket, the good one, the one he usually saved for the coldest nights. He set the bag in the center, arranged the folds so the fabric lay flat, not hidden, not forgotten, honored. Then he filled the kettle, put it on the stove, sat in the chair by the window, and waited. The wolf didn't move for a long time. She lay by the stove, watching the bag, watching him. Her breathing was slow and even. The trembling had stopped. The keening had stopped. She was just present. Here, in the room, in the moment. The kettle started to whistle. Caleb made coffee fresh this time, not yesterday's dregs. The smell filled the cabin, rich and dark. An hour passed. The light outside shifted from gray to gold as the clouds thinned. Caleb watched the shadows move across the floor. The fire crackled. The wolf breathed. Then she stood. 3 legs at first. Testing. The splint on her hind leg had held through everything: the cliff, the crawl, the long night at the edge. She put weight on it now, tentative, and it didn't buckle. She took a step, another, limping badly, but moving under her own power. Caleb didn't speak, didn't coax. She crossed the room, reached the blanket, sniffed the bag a long, deep inhale, taking in the scent of leather and earth and everything she'd been carrying. She circled it once, twice, then she lay down beside it, not on top, not clutching, beside. Her front paw stretched out, resting on the edge of the blanket, touching the bag, but not gripping, not holding on with that desperate, dying grip he'd seen on the cliff, just touching. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, deepened. The tension that had been locked in her muscles for months, that constant, rigid readiness drained out of her body like water soaking into dry ground. Caleb watched her sleep, real sleep, the kind that comes when you finally stop running. He thought about Danny, not the river, not the water rushing over rocks, the current pulling at his brother's body, the sound of his own voice calling the pullback, not the funeral, not the casket, not the look on his mother's face when they told her. He thought about the summer before, Danny at the grill behind their parents' house, burning hot dogs because he'd gotten distracted telling a story and forgot to flip them. The way he'd laughed when the smoke alarm went off, that big, stupid laugh that made everyone else laugh too, even their father, who just wanted a decent meal. Danny fixing their mother's porch swing with the wrong size screws. It had squeaked for years afterward, every time someone sat in it. She never let him fix it again, but she never stopped using it either. Danny calling at midnight just to talk about nothing. The sound of his voice through the phone, tired and happy, going on about a movie he'd seen or a dog he'd met or a girl he was thinking about asking out. Those were the memories that mattered, not the last one. Maybe letting go didn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just meant making room for the rest of it. 6 weeks later, the snow began to melt. Caleb walked the ridge trail with Ghost beside him. She limped, still would probably always limp, but she was stronger now. The splint had come off 2 weeks ago. She'd started eating the day after Maggie's visit and hadn't stopped since. Her ribs no longer showed through her fur. The collar stayed around her neck. She'd never tried to remove it. They reached the burial site as the morning sun broke through the clouds. The grave was different now. Caleb had rebuilt the stone marker a proper circle this time, large enough to see from a distance. At the center, he'd buried the bag, all 23 collars, returned to the family they belonged to, not scattered, not forgotten, placed with care, the way Walter would have done it. Ghost stood at the edge of the circle, looked down at the stones. The flower tag at her throat caught the light gold against gray. She stood there for a long moment. Then she turned and looked at Caleb. He nodded. She held his gaze, then she turned and walked toward the tree line, her limp barely visible now in her steady stride. At the edge of the pines, she paused, looked back once more. Caleb raised his hand. She disappeared into the forest. He walked back to the cabin alone. On the table, in a frame he'd found in the closet, sat the photograph. 2 boys by a river grinning, holding up a trout that was probably too small to keep. Danny on the left, Caleb on the right, their father behind the camera, his shadow visible in the corner of the shot. He'd taken it out of the drawer the night before, put it where the morning light could reach it. He touched the frame as he passed the wood smooth under his fingers and moved to the stove, filled the kettle, put water on for coffee, opened the cabin door to let in the spring air. The smell hit him first, pine and wet earth, and something green pushing up through the last of the snow. The morning was warming fast. He could hear water running somewhere close, snowmelt finding its way downhill. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf howled. Caleb stood in the doorway, listening. The sound rose and fell, not grief this time, not mourning, something that sounded almost like greeting. He listened until it faded. Then he poured his coffee, sat down in the open doorway, and watched the snow melt. The mountains in the distance were still white, but the valley floor was turning brown and green. Spring coming, life returning. The coffee steamed in his hands. The sun warmed his face. The door stayed open behind him, letting the morning air fill the cabin, and somewhere out there, in the forest, a wolf was running. If this story left something sitting quietly in your chest, something heavy, or tender, or hard to name, that's all right. Some feelings don't ask to be understood. They just ask to be felt. Many of us have carried things we thought we could never set down, guilt that wasn't ours to hold, grief that stayed longer than we expected, love for someone who left before we could say what needed saying. Perhaps you know what it's like to stand on your own kind of riverbank, watching something slip away, wondering if you could have done more. Perhaps you've spent years being hard on yourself for simply surviving. You're not alone in that. And if tonight you're still holding on to something, a memory, a name, a moment you haven't quite forgiven yourself for, it's okay to let it rest beside you instead of on top of you. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to understand it. Some things just need to be carried a little differently now. The wolf found her way home, not by forgetting, but by learning that surviving wasn't a betrayal. Maybe that's enough for one evening. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.